Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Starsky Report show. All the glory, by the way, for the name of the show goes directly to Janine, our mercenary moderator. Very nice to see you guys. And today we have my good friend Jake here with us. I bet as much as half of my viewers are also subscribed to his channel. And if you didn't do it, you can still fix it. Uh, Hi, Jake. It's always a pleasure to see you. Please say hello to our viewers and tell us a couple words about yourself.
Hey Starsky, thanks for having me on your channel. We had our talk about maybe like 3 weeks ago, and very good reception on my channel. Having you on as a guest, people were very excited to see you. Like you said, I think there is a lot of overlap between our two audiences. So on my channel, I've been trying to get more YouTubers to appear. I've had Ryan Macbeth, Dennis Davidoff, Anna from Ukraine. I'll actually be doing an interview tomorrow with the Russian dude. He's a Russian expat currently living in Canada who makes daily videos in support of Ukraine. More about me. I'm a United States Air Force veteran. I served for 6 years as a nuclear and missile operations officer. I just separated from active duty in February and decided to do YouTube full time. Prior to the war, I was talking about finance and investing topics. And then as soon as the war kicked off, I started also talking about the war in Ukraine. And then eventually, the audience, my audience grew so large from people wanting to learn more about the war in Ukraine. It kind of outpaced my finance and investing audience that I had prior. So here we are 7 months later, and now I'm just talking about geopolitics and current events. I have a master's degree in international relations, so I am very interested in geopolitical events and politics. And yeah, I mean, if I can raise awareness to help support Ukraine during this difficult time, that's what I want to focus on with my channel.
Sounds great. I have a question. Uh, like before you started making videos about the situation in Ukraine, uh, did you have like friends or maybe relatives in Ukraine?
Absolutely none. Very little knowledge, I'll be honest. I've read some books about Ukraine since then, and obviously I've been taking in all this information and talking to people like you. But prior to the war, no, I didn't have any personal relationships or connections with anyone in Ukraine.
It's interesting. Guys, by the way, guys, it would be very nice if you could tell us where are you from. So please type your country in the chat. And today we're gonna talk about sanctions because I think it's a very interesting topic. I think we all want to know if they work and what to expect. Everybody asks me, for example, every day. I'm not an expert. That's why we have Jake here. So it's been almost like half a year since the first sanctions were placed on Russia. And in your opinion, were they effective, or we still have to wait a bit before they start working, before they bring any results?
Well, I think some sanctions immediately had a huge impact, and some sanctions it's going to take much more time for them to play out. A good example is anything relating to the Russian aviation industry, which has been completely crippled. They're running out of parts. They can't maintain the planes that they stole from other countries. So yeah, their aviation industry is dead. So that's a sanctions that worked well immediately. Some that didn't work as well, maybe, is if you remember in the first month of the war, there was all this talk about kicking these Russian banks out of SWIFT. And Western countries did kick some of them out, but not all of them. So their largest banks that were kicked out of SWIFT, it's pretty much the end of those banks. But money can just be moved around. They can be very porous. So uh, I think I think the West wanted to do something with those restrictions on SWIFT, but they also wanted to make sure that payments could still be made because Russia is still selling energy and commodities to the West. Most countries have stopped buying oil, but natural gas was still flowing through the Nord Stream pipeline all the way up until 3 or 4 weeks ago. And when you're moving around billions of dollars, you need a system to do that. Other sanctions, just cutting them off from any kind of technology or equipment that could help their military industry. I feel like we're seeing the results of that. I believe that missile attacks with precision guided weapons from the Russians has severely diminished because they can't make any more. They're not getting the chips, they're not getting the components that all come from Western companies to make their precision guided weaponry. So every time they fire one, I'm sure there's a calculation knowing how much their existing stockpile remains, and they can't make any more. Other sanctions, I feel like if a factory goes idle for a month, it's not a big deal. But if a factory goes idle for 6 months or a year, you now need to make decisions on, are you going to let people go? Are you just going to mothball the whole factory and close up shop and give up? I think there's a lot of people in the West too that was hoping that this would be a short conflict, that maybe Russia in a couple of months would realize its mistake and pull out or try and just concentrate on the Donbass region. But now that I think we've crossed another red line, I think the reaction from political leaders like Macron and Schultz with this general mobilization of the Russian people, there's no ending this conflict with honor where Putin can remain in power. I think a week ago there was still European leaders entertaining that idea of somehow you'd be allowed to stay in power, but Putin, in effect, has declared total war. He's mobilized every aspect of his country. You can't. How do you de-escalate this? I don't know anyone has an answer.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy. I think that, like, on one hand, if it wasn't Russia, if it was a different country, however, it's hard to imagine a different country where such things may happen. But anyways, if it was a different country, I think that this mobilization would be literally like an end of Putin's regime. But what's your opinion, by the way, about those protests?
We've nowhere gotten nowhere near any kind of critical mass necessary for a revolution. I think Putin's security forces and police, I think all those men have a personal motivation to keep doing their job because being a secret police officer in Moscow is keeping you out of the military and going to Ukraine to fight.
Yeah.
So I think Russians' police forces are very motivated to keep doing their jobs and doing them well so they don't get conscripted. But when a society doesn't allow for peaceful protest, when they don't allow people to express themselves or express grievances to their elected representatives, the only other alternative you have is violence, is criminal acts. That's why we're seeing conscription offices having Molotov cocktails thrown through the window. I'm sure a lot of these Russians would be happy to petition their governments, protest, meet with representatives to express. But Russia's not a democracy. For people living in a democracy, the rules that we all understand and live by don't apply. So the only thing left is for ordinary Russians to wake up and get violent, and that's what I think is coming. Lots of acts of arson, lots of destruction, lots of mafia style hits on people loyal to the Putin regime, from the lowest level as high as they can go. I think the chaos and disorder coming to Russia this winter is, I mean, it's going to be shocking because we now live in the 21st century where everyone has iPhones and can capture these moments on HD video. Even 30 years ago, when the Soviet Union collapsed, nobody was really seeing the day-to-day actions from ordinary people. We didn't have smartphones or the internet to the degree that we have now.
Yeah, it's true. So the changes are coming very soon. And that's basically what I've been saying multiple times this week, that it exactly, like, if this country, if this regime despises democracy and freedom of speech, there's no way those democratic protests gonna bring some kind of results. You have to act violently, unfortunately. And that's exactly what we had in Ukraine in 2013, 2014, in order to gain our right to live in a democratic society, because sometimes you have to fight for democracy.
Revolutions are messy.
Yeah, yeah. uh, there was a question I wanted to ask you. So the United States warned Putin against using the Russian nuclear weapons in Ukraine, promising
Mhm.
some additional sanctions as a response to this. How do you think, what exactly steps can we expect from the United States and the rest of the world in case the Russians decide to go full kamikaze?
If Russia used a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, one, the United States, the nuclear powers in NATO are the UK, France, and the United States, and they're not going to announce what they would do in retaliation because they don't want the Russians to do a cost benefit analysis. If like if Russia was threatening to use a nuke, and then the United States said, well, if you do that, we're going to nuke Kaliningrad, then Russia might actually make the calculation of, okay, it's worth it. You know, if we get something we want that we think is more valuable than this territory being retaliated against, then they might actually make the decision to do it based on what the stated retaliation would be. So it's best not to state clearly what you're going to do in response. You want the Russian military to use their imagination of how bad it could be. The rumor that I'm hearing, no way to confirm this because no one's ever going to make a statement. But the rumor I'm hearing is that if Russia does use a nuke, NATO would get involved in the conflict and not respond with a nuclear weapon because they don't want any more use. They don't want to escalate. If Russia uses a nuke and then NATO uses a nuke, you've lost your moral superiority. You've lowered yourself to their level. So to maintain uh, the moral superiority, even in war, they would use conventional weapons to unleash devastation on the Russian military. And more than likely, the rumor I've heard is they would just sink every ship in the Black Sea fleets. NATO today, right now, has that capability to launch enough cruise missiles or whatever to target every ship that Russia has in the Black Sea. Within 48 hours, they would all be on fire or at the bottom of the Black Sea. Another target is Kaliningrad. NATO could just concentrate their response just on that one province and say, Russia, you crossed a red line. You know, we're trying to stay out of it, but you forced our hand by using nuclear weapons on the European continent. In response, we're going to use conventional weapons to destroy every military asset in Kaliningrad.
Sounds interesting. And yeah, by the way, I totally believe that NATO can eliminate the Black Sea fleet. It's not gonna take much time. Yeah.
7 months into this conflict, it's been proven how ineffective and useless Russian air defense systems are. And every day, Ukrainians keep blowing up more with these harm missiles. Russia Russia's defenseless. Like a true war between NATO and Russia, maybe there was some ambiguity a year ago of what Russia's capabilities are, but Russia has completely exposed themselves.
I wa- what makes me totally surprised about those harm missiles is that actually our pilots, like our not pilots, of course, but our people managed to attach them to Soviet aircraft. I mean, is it even possible?
There's got to be, I mean, somebody did a software update or a hack in order to make that possible. And it doesn't need to be the Ukrainians to figure out how to do it. As far as stuff on the back end with compatibility or maintenance or anything like that, I'm sure some very intelligent engineer somewhere in NATO came up with the idea and said, I can do this. Let me show them how to do it, and then it's just the Ukrainians physically probably having to do it. But there's all kinds of patchwork fixes being supplied by people with this kind of expertise and knowledge in the West.
I mean, it's fantastic. Uh, do Russians have a chance to stabilize their economy despite the sanctions? I'm asking this question because one of our main concerns is that Russians will will find a way to replace their vehicles that were destroyed and like build new vehicles, build new tanks and artillery. We know that currently they have issues with that because they cannot buy parts, and their artillery uses its resources, right? But do they have some kind of chance to, to undo those sanctions, so to say?
So when you look at, go back 8 years to 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. Sanctions, moderate ones, were put on Russia in 2014. And for the last 8 years, Russia's economy has not grown. You can Google Russia GDP and you can see the chart for yourself. So Russia's entire economy has been stagnant for 8 years just based on the limited sanctions put on them 8 years ago. I think with hindsight being 2020, maybe the sanctions should have been more intense 8 years ago. But here we are in 2022, and with everything that the West has done, uh, I feel like Russia is doomed to collapse. It's going to take them a very long time to even get to a point where they stop falling. And Russia is being hit with lots of compounding factors, but one of them is demographics. Russia's population actually peaked back in 1992. When the Soviet Union collapsed, that actually was the most amount of Russians there ever existed in the world, and their population has been declining for 30 years.
Hmm.
So there's lots of Peter Zion is one demographic and geopolitics strategists who have argued that Russia feels pressured to invade Ukraine now and get it back because they think their demographics, as far as declining births and not enough young people, this is their last chance to fight a big war. As when you look at it, their population pyramid, I was just looking at it today actually, and there's like 6 million Russian women between the ages of 60 and 64, but there's only 3 million Russian women between the ages of 20 and 24.
Really?
This is horrendous demographics because you need more young people ideally, but at least an equal number of young people to work jobs, pay taxes, have kids, raise families, take care of those elderly people as they, grow old. Russian men just drink themselves to death at 68, but there's still a lot of elderly Russian women in Russia's society. So Russia is experiencing hardship, even if there was no war, even if there was no sanctions, even if everything was going great otherwise. The fact that they cannot produce positive population growth in their society, Russia's just kind of an abysmal place to live. It's cold, it's dark, there's not easy modes of transport. They're very dependent on rail. Everything is far away and spread out. So yeah, it's already a difficult place to live, but with the world's largest economies, minus China, not doing business with them, yeah, everything is just going to cascade collapse eventually. Just takes time.
Hmm. That's interesting. Um, that's interesting. Like I did know that they have such problems with
I think
older
there's a
people. Yeah.
I think Russia has been really focused on stealing Ukrainians for this reason. How many Ukrainians have been taken from the occupied territories back to Russia? How many people are in these filtration camps? And it's what, close to 2 million? It doesn't make sense to do that unless that was part of your strategic objectives to go into this country because your own population is declining and then steal as many Russian speakers as you can to bring back to Russia in order to just Russify them, acclimate them, make them your own.
Yeah, sounds reasonable. Plus, you can always use them as hostages. There's a lot of possibilities and opportunities. Um, I wonder how does the trading isolation of Russia, how does it influence Russian society in general? Because even the despite the fact that their stores and shops are pretty much empty, not completely, of course, but let's say partially empty, they don't seem to be very upset about it.
I think the average Russian, they just have their head in the ground, head in the sand, hoping that someone else will resolve this problem. I think, sadly, for Russians in general, their society has always been brutal. It's always been hard. Going back to, Ivan the Terrible or the czars of Russia to Stalin and the Soviet Union. I mean, it's never really been a good time to be a Russian. And when things are getting worse and revolution is starting to ferment, I think the attitude of a lot of Russians is hopefully somebody else can handle this and I can just stay alive and not be noticed. But with things continuing to get worse, what can you do? You can't petition your local representatives, you can't protest, you can't write letters to the editor, you can't even use the word war. So I think this spell over the average Russian has to be broken, and they have to realize that things are bad and things are getting worse. And it's better just to, the expression is rip the band aid off. Just have your violent revolution, storm the Capitol, liquidate everyone who's made these horrible decisions that has got you to where you are. Russians know, they know about the oligarchs. They know that the wealth of their nation is being stolen by a small circle of individuals. The average Russian, in a small town, their life is not glamorous. They don't have good public services or good health care or good infrastructure. Like things maybe are better than they were under the Soviet Union 30 years ago. But if you go on the internet and you see how life is like in Berlin or Paris or London, you're getting screwed in Russia.
It's true. It's true. There's this city yesterday that I made this joke on the shills. There's this Russian city called Sызrань, which is pretty bad, even judging from the name. And probably this city didn't see asphalt like for 30 years. So there's a joke that the worst Russian missile that exists is called Sызrань. And when such missile, for example, strikes some European city like Berlin or Paris or any other city in Europe, instead of destroying it, it turns it into Sızrань. Uh, so yeah, Uh, when we talk about Russian allies, for example, China, how do you think can China direct can China sacrifice their revenue that they have from trading with Western countries in order to directly support Russia with technologies and goods?
So, as far as I know, Russia has been trying to maintain neutrality in this conflict. Yes, I think from your perspective, a Ukrainian's perspective, China is acting like an ally by not participating in sanctions. But the Chinese perspective is we don't want anything to do with this. Yes, China and Russia have been holding military drills between the two of them for 15 years, but they've never signed a formal military alliance. They have no duties or obligations to each other. If Russia was attacked, China is not duty bound to come to their defense. And when this war broke out, China and the United Nations said, we're not going to help Russia, but we're also not going to interrupt our normal trade and operations with them. So they're not increasing, aid or supply or financing or anything like that, but they're also not participating in Western sanctions. And I think there's a lot of Chinese companies, independent of the government in China, Chinese companies that don't want to become entangled with anything related to the Russian military defense, industrial complex, because they're worried of secondary sanctions. Because at any time, the United States or the EU could say, "Hey, you Chinese company, you're selling parts to, this Russian company, and that Russian company is part of Russia's defense industry to build this weapon. So we're going to sanction you for providing parts or equipment to this." And China, these Chinese companies, they don't want to risk it. Their operations are already profitable. Everyone in China is getting rich. There's more Chinese billionaires than there are American billionaires now. So why would they risk everything to help the Russians? It doesn't interest them, doesn't concern them. And I've made this argument on my channel that China has the most to gain from Russia losing this war. If Russian influence and prestige and presence in the world diminishes, China is going to fill that gap. If the Central Asian republics, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, for 30 years, Big Brother has been Moscow. Moscow is the one who has been resolving disputes and kind of getting what they want from these countries. But we're already seeing a shift with countries like Kazakhstan trying to get closer militarily to the Chinese for protection from the Russians. So I think Central Asia is in play, and Beijing's power and prestige in Central Asia is only going to increase because they're the world's second largest economy. They have the money to toss around, and eventually China's defense, industry and exports will become more desirable or more effective or more reliable than Russians. This war has proven that Russia's military production and exports are garbage. The other way that China can benefit from Russian demise is outer Manchuria. I've talked about this in videos on my channel, but uh, during China's century of humiliation, so from about 1850 to 1950, European powers carved up China. This was Germany, Portugal, Great Britain, France, Japan, and Russia. So
Hmm.
everyone had their sphere of influence: the Portuguese in Macau, the British in Hong Kong, the French in Shanghai. And when the communists took over, when they had their revolution, all of the European powers, all of the foreign powers were expelled. All of the European and foreign powers except Russia, because the Soviet Union was the 800-pound gorilla after World War II, and they had a 10 million man army. the Soviet Union just said, we're going to keep Vladivostok, we're going to keep outer Manchuria, even though we took it from you with a war just 50 years ago. And I think if you're a Chinese nationalist, if you're a Chinese netizen, why would you be okay with that? If Russia shows weakness, if the Russian political system starts to collapse, China can get its territory back. You know, this was their territory under the Qing dynasty. And by the way, in the Kuril Islands, there's large deposits of oil and natural gas that Russia hasn't gotten around to tapping yet. So it makes all the sense in the world, if there's any kind of weakness in Moscow, for Beijing to expand their borders and get back territory, historical boundaries that used to belong to the Chinese Empire.
Yeah, it's true. Like, I thought about Kuril Islands a couple of days ago. We were talking with my colleagues, and I thought, like, the, take a look at those islands. There's nothing built. Like, there's nothing on those islands except a bunch of Russian military bases that look completely deteriorated and stuff. Can you imagine those islands if they belonged to their owners, right? Like Japan, for example. I mean, we could see some crazy structures and cities and, I don't know, hotels and whatever, airports, but it's like deserts.
Russia and the Soviet Union have always been a capital poor nation. They just don't have, after the oligarchs and billionaires take their cut, they don't have the money to develop outer Manchuria or the Kuril Islands. You can go on Google satellite images and look at the Chinese border and
Yeah.
then the Russian border. In the Russian border, there's nothing there. It's just wooded forest land. Whereas on the Chinese side, every square inch of land is being cultivated, being used for productivity. I mean, once again, if I was a Chinese person and I looked at that map, I'd say Russia's not even using it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's crazy. If we take a look at Abkhazia, for example, or South Ossetia, Abkhazia in Soviet times, it was a center for the tourism in Soviet Union. Basically, they had hotels, they had beaches, they had everything, and it was very popular among Soviet tourists. Everybody liked to spend their vacations there. And after this war in Abkhazia in 1992, I believe, 1993.
Are these the two provinces in Georgia, or what are you
Yeah,
talking about?
yeah, yeah.
So Russia invaded Georgia in 2008.
Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, but in 1992, if I'm not wrong, they had this basically the same situation like in Ukraine. So they fueled separatists in Abkhazia and they backed them. So they decided to separate from Georgia. Russians brought their army, their like peacekeepers, and they delivered military assistance to those separatists, and it was quite a fight. So after that, after Abkhazia was like liberated by Russians, it's like a forest, like forest of Amazonia, because all those hotels, they deteriorate with time. Nobody uses them, of course, because nobody recognizes Abkhazia as a separate state, independent state. And I saw a video from some blogger who travels around Caucasus and other areas. Like, Abkhazia, all those hotels, all those cozy, resorts and stuff. It looks like Pripyat in Chernobyl. Absolutely, everything is abandoned, and you know, same with South Ossetia, by the way, the one that they captured in 2008. Absolutely, there's like this. Oh my god, I forgot the Tskinval, that their capital, so called. Um, most streets don't have asphalt. Absolutely.
Yeah. Russia's not interested in developing, anything outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg. Moscow and St. Petersburg are the postcards. That's the propaganda cities that they say to the world, this is what Russia is. It's beautiful, it's wealthy, it's educated. But literally everywhere else doesn't matter. Just doesn't
Yeah.
matter. They're not concerned about lifting people out of poverty or, reducing preventable diseases or, there's a lot of there's a lot of other factors in Russia that pose huge problems. HIV is actually pretty rampant in Russia because they don't do testing and they don't do screening and they don't promote awareness. Hey, we have an epidemic of HIV in the country. People should be either using condoms or getting tested or screened. I'm sure there's also a lot of drug use, maybe methamphetamines, and some pretty nasty stuff that isn't going to make you an effective soldier for the military. The obvious one is excessive alcohol drinking and abuse. There's just a serious depression on the whole country. But those two breakaway provinces, hopefully, with some kind of political collapse of Russia, maybe Georgia can get back that territory and actually develop it and make it nice again.
Yeah, I worked in the World Bank Group back in 2008, and we had so chief of the health sector of the World Bank in Kiev was my good friend. We often discussed those things, and he said that one of the biggest problems in Russia was injection drug users, because they tend to use the same like the same syringe multiple times, and that's why there's big risk of getting AIDS. And
Yep.
those two problems are very, very closely connected in Russia.
Same is true in the United States. It's a debate here in the United States. Should people who abuse injectable drugs, should there be, we call them clean needle stations where you can drop off dirty needles and then get fresh ones. Now, obviously, doing heroin is illegal, but just exchanging needles is not. And
Yeah,
the argument is if you don't do this, then this is only going to lead to the transfer of HIV. But if you do this, then at least they have clean needles and they're going to do it anyways. So I'm personally in favor of decriminalizing drugs and then just trying to help people who suffer from addiction.
absolutely, I support that. um, in one of your previous videos, you explained why Russian ruble was so expensive, even despite the sanctions and isolation. How did it help Russia, if it did?
Generally, a strong currency means a strong economy. Uh, if if it's actually the free market fair market value of your currency. The problem is you can look at the trading volume of rubles to euros or rubles to dollars or rubles to any currency, and everything has fallen off of a cliff as people are not doing as much business with Russia right now. And Russia took a bunch of extraordinary steps that no Western government or bank would ever allow when the war broke out. So I can list them off for you. The first one is they stopped their own citizens from pulling money out in other currencies. Normally, even if you're a Russian in Russia, you can go to your local bank and say, "Hey, I'm taking a trip to France and I need euros. I'd like to convert my rubles in my checking account, pull out some euro dollars, and take my trip." So Russia put caps and limitations on a dollar amount very low so that people couldn't sell rubles to buy other currencies. The next thing they did is they stopped all foreigners from being able to pull their assets out of Russia. So if you're a Swedish businessman or probably even a Chinese businessman, and you owned assets in Russia, either stocks, bonds, or real estate, the Russian government said, sorry, you're not allowed to sell. We'll let you know when you can sell again, but for now, you can't. And they're still allowing you to buy. If you want to buy Russian assets, you can do that. You just can't sell it. So you can't get your money out. The biggest thing they did to immediately stabilize it in those first 2 weeks is Russia was holding foreign currencies in reserve. They had spent 8, 10 years saving up US dollars, saving up euros, saving up yuan. And when the ruble collapsed, they converted their foreign currency to buy their own currency to artificially pump it up. That's a one trick shot. Once your money's gone, you can't do that again. And it's debatable. Like in the video I made, I talked about this whether or not you want a strengthening currency. A strong currency means that when you travel abroad, so if you're a Russian and your currency is strong and you want to take a vacation to Italy, your rubles get you farther. They buy more stuff when you go abroad. How many Russians are, really going abroad or benefiting from a stronger currency? The other one is business. If you're a Russian business and it's easier to open up stores or operations or expand into these other countries because your currency is stronger, that gives you an advantage. But how many Russian businesses are expanding operations in the United States or Europe at the moment? So a strengthening dollar is a propaganda win for people online leaving comments, but it's not actually benefiting Russians. And in many ways, a weakening currency, not too much, but slightly, a weakening currency would actually help them pay their employees. So if your currency is devaluing as you sell your oil or sell your coal or sell your diamonds or whatever Russia exports, you're actually bringing in more rubles. The value changed, but the number of rubles you got went up, and then you can pay your employees, you can pay your taxes, you can do all that stuff. But when your currency strengthens, you're bringing in less rubles, and you still have to pay your employees, you still have to pay your taxes, you still have to figure out how you're going to keep your business going. So there's strengths, there's pros and cons to your currency getting stronger or getting weaker, and neither direction benefits Russia really because they're experiencing so much hostility from Western countries.
That's crazy. And can cryptocurrency help Russians in any way? Specifically, can it help them to evade sanctions?
I'm biased. I'm not a big supporter of cryptocurrency. I don't think it is. I think blockchain technology could evolve to allow for a global decentralized currency. I think that's possible. I just don't think any of the existing formats that we've seen, such as Bitcoin or Ethereum, I don't think those are the ones yet. But can cryptocurrency help ordinary Russians get around sanctions? Yeah, absolutely. Is it going to save the Russian government? No, I don't think so because Nvidia and AMD and other chip makers are not doing business on the dark web in cryptocurrency. Drug dealers and child traffickers are doing that. So
Yeah. We have an interesting question from Kieferbaum. Uh, how the mobilization influences the economy in Russia? in your opinion?
I think it's a disaster. I'm going to explain it. A video I filmed this morning that I will upload in about 2 hours. But Russia is actually struggling with a labor shortage. So when you look at the unemployment rate in Russia right now, it's 3.7%. And normally, in a healthy, industrialized, advanced economy, low unemployment is good. You want everyone who's looking for a job to be able to find a job. But with Russia, they're experiencing a labor shortage due to one, demographics. People are growing old and they don't have enough young people to support it. But also, hundreds of thousands of Russians have fled Russia in the last 7 months. Most of them are educated, think doctors, engineers, scientists, anybody with skills that America or Canada or Australia will say, yeah, we'll give you a work visa, come stay in our country. So Russia has a labor shortage with extremely low unemployment because hundreds of thousands of people have left and their demographics are a nightmare. And now they're pulling 1.2 million able bodied men, Russian men, out of the workforce to go die in Ukraine. This isn't going to work. This is an absolute nightmare. So those men had jobs, whether it was a garbage sanitation pickup driver or a mailman or any job. All of them are necessary, whether you're a chef in a kitchen or something. You're providing economic value to your country, to your economy. You're earning a wage, you're paying taxes, you're keeping everything stable. And Russia just took 1.2 able-bodied men out of their economy to provide no economic value to anyone by sitting in a trench in Ukraine.
I mean, what do they expect to happen?
For Putin, I think this is just utter desperation. And for Putin, he has to get some kind of tangible win to justify the tens of thousands, soon to be hundreds of thousands of Russians killed. And for him, it's all or nothing. He might as well escalate because the way it's going now, he's just going to get murdered by his own people, get murdered by the FSB. This is how Russia does things. And even though Putin has done everything right for 22 years, brainwashing his people with propaganda, purging his government and inner circle of anyone that would question him or threaten him, at some point there's going to be a break where even the most spineless sock puppet will say, all right, what if we just murder this guy and then we can go back to business as normal? And Putin knows it. His bodyguards have to have guns, right? If you work in the secret service to protect Putin, you have to have a weapon. It only takes one guy who lost a brother or lost a cousin or knows somebody that they were close to that was needlessly wasted in Ukraine, and they say, I'm going to be the guy that puts an end to this.
Yeah, we hope that there will be some kind of sober bodyguard with good intentions. uh, I will only applaud this. People usually say that, and I'm asking because you have experience in this field. People usually say in the commentaries that if Russia was to launch a nuclear missile, specifically some ICBM, there's probably a chance that it's not gonna work. What do you think about it?
So when you think about a missile silo, an intercontinental ballistic missile inside, there's a lot of routine maintenance that has to continuously occur. The cooling system, the communication equipment, all the moving parts necessary to get in and out of it. It all has to be properly maintained in order for it to function when you want it to function. I'll give you an example. For our missile silos, we have hardened doors that go over them. They're like several tons heavy. and there are ballistic gas explosives in order to uh, pull back the cables to have the door roll open. So if Americans were to launch an ICBM, we need the door to open prior to the missile taking off. So something as simple as that. If you're not properly maintaining that door and that door doesn't open when you launch it, it's going to blow up in the hole. There's lots of production issues or maintenance issues that could lead to one of the down stages critically failing on takeoff. Uh, so, am I skeptical of the upkeep and the service regimen that the Russians have been doing on their nuclear forces? 100%. Now, does that mean they're all going to fail? No, some of them will work properly. And if just one leaves a missile silo, that's a big problem for the entire world. So I'm not giving them, a 90% success rate. I'm giving them maybe a 40 or 50, but that's still enough to kill tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people.
I didn't know that regarding the maintenance, because how much do the US spend to upkeep all of their nuclear power?
So with the United States, we have the nuclear triad. So there's three legs. There's bombers, submarines, and ICBMs. I was a missileer who worked in the land leg of the nuclear triad. This is our ICBMs. So bombers are their own worlds. I never participated in that. And then submarines belong to the Navy. So I was in the Air Force. What is the cost? I don't have those numbers off the top of my head, but uh, surprisingly, nuclear silos, ICBMs were the cheapest of the three. I know that as a fact. So there's the initial cost getting them in the ground and digging them up, but to maintain them year to year, it's actually not as expensive compared to other Air Force programs. Less expensive than the Ohio class nuclear submarine, which the Navy operates, or the B 52s and the B 2s that the Air Force operates.
That's interesting. Uh, the reason I'm asking is because I had those numbers. I've lost them, and because I'm old, I cannot remember the number. But it was like, comparing to the US. Of course, it's not that big, probably from your standpoint, but from the standpoint of Ukraine or Russia, uh, yeah, that's some impressive amount of money.
How I understand it in Russia is that the Strategic Rocket Forces is its own branch of the military. And because of the importance that ICBMs had under Soviet doctrine, they've always just been given preferential treatments. The rocket scientists of the old Soviet Union, they prioritized their missiles. They thought that's what kept them safe. But for them it's much more important, and I can crystallize this for you, the difference in thinking of our nuclear forces in the United States. The people who spend the most time underground in a launch control capsule are lieutenants, second lieutenants, and first lieutenants. They probably make up a majority of all the shifts being taken. We always have two officers down there, but they're junior people, they're brand new, they're like in their early 20s. So, because you're in the fields, spending 24 hours at a time just sitting underground, it's not that exciting. Yes, it's important, but on base, that's where leadership should be. Colonels sitting in meetings, handling, events. There's lots more that they could be doing not underground. In Russia, it's the complete opposites. You have to be a full bird colonel in order to sit downstairs in a launch control capsule. They would never trust a 22-year-old lieutenant, with the nuclear responsibility of launching, should the Russian president give that order. So in Russia, you have to do your time, decades before you get that right to sit underground in a launch control capsule. I thought that was pretty interesting that that is their focus, their perspective. It's very prestigious, very, in the Russian military, it's something to brag about that you did that. Whereas in the United States Air Force, missileers is not viewed as a glamorous job.
I didn't know that, but I can totally confirm, what you said about Russians, because uh, in Russian army they don't trust even their own NCOs. That's why their NCOs basically do the same job as their privates. There's zero difference between them, because officers usually, because of this lack of trust, and because of this Russian military culture, they have this. Their officers usually take full responsibility over everything. That's why they are usually overloaded with tasks, and because you cannot do the job of your NCO and your officer's duties at the same time, but they do that. Uh, they suck at both, basically. I mean, they cannot do efficiently like neither one. Uh, yeah, and that's a problem. Like, I don't know why do they keep like ignoring their NCOs and
I don't
stuff.
think
But
they have career enlisted because what's the point? What's the benefits?
yeah,
In the United States, if you make it 20 years active duty, you get a pension. You get basically a paycheck for the rest of your life after getting out of service. It's very expensive. The United States spends a lot of money paying our all volunteer professional force, but in Russia, they don't do that. They just conscript everyone and then pressure them to sign contracts to stay a little bit longer after that. But I don't know why if you were a Russian enlisted person would you want to do decades in the Russian military when it sounds like absolute torture? Like it just sounds terrible.
yeah,
I don't see the benefit other than that's the only stable job you think you can get for some reason. But if those are the people that the Russian military wants to keep, I don't think it's really helping them.
yeah. And by the way, we have information from Bill Bopperton. He has said that 70 billion. Yeah, that's the number that I had. 70 billion dollars a year is the figure from the U.S. Congressional Budget Office. 70 billion
For
dollars spent.
what? All the nuclear forces or what?
Uh, I doubt that it's like all the nuclear forces. Probably it's like only the ICBMs.
Well, so the annual defense budget of the United States is close to like 700 billion, and there's no way that 10% of that is just like I don't know. I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I don't want to speak to numbers.
There's another number, 40. Oh no, it's like 44. It's something different. Uh, yeah. Anyways, we have also some questions from our viewers.
Cool.
Ercol Armani asks, was the ar actually you have a bunch of questions. Was the army your passion since you were a child?
So I'm older than people think. I'm 38, and I joined the Air Force at age 32. So I had a whole private life prior to joining the military. I did it for a couple reasons. One, my father did serve in the military back in the 70s, only for 4 years. He actually was drafted during Vietnam. He never went to Vietnam, but he was forced to serve. He didn't really want to. And I always considered military service, but when you're 20, you just kind of want to go to college and live your life and do what you want. But realistically, I made the decision at 32 to join the Air Force for the benefits. I wanted what we call the GI Bill, which allows you to go to college for free, plus you get a really nice housing allowance. In the United States, we're always insecure about healthcare, so I knew I would be covered there as long as I served. I also just wanted to travel. When I had the idea of joining the United States military, I really wanted to go somewhere. I wanted to go to a U.S. military base in Germany or Japan or South Korea or somewhere exciting. Unfortunately, I never got an assignment. So they never let me go. But I joined at 32, and by the time I was 38, I said I can't, or 37, I said I can't do this anymore, and I decided to get out.
Yeah, same here. Totally understand you. I am 37 now. Uh, so why were you in, yeah. Did you consider becoming a pilot?
No, absolutely not. Some people live for that glory. I'm fine with that. I don't know. Like for me, it's just so bizarre. But the idea of being somewhere where I don't have access to a bathroom, I mean, to me that just seems really bizarre. I know Air Force pilots have to wear diapers, and I'll let them have the glory. I'm cool not being a pilot. Uh, I don't know if I would have qualified either. I think even at 32, if I tried, they'd say you're too old. There's so much time and money and investment into a pilot that they would rather select somebody who's 22, 23, 24 than someone older. It's still possible, but no, I never even tried. Never, no interest.
I dreamt about being a pilot when I was a kid, but my dad was a tank commander, and he said something. Uh, if you are born to crawl, you cannot fly. Something like that. Those tankers are, Uh, what is the best and worst thing about being in the army? Question from the same person.
So the best thing about my military experience or my military service in the United States is that you're part of something bigger than you. You belong to this organization that has a history going back hundreds of years, and it has its own customs and courtesies and culture, and you get to be a part of it. You get to share it and experience. I'm weird, but I liked the saluting, I liked the ceremonies, I liked the recognition and awards. Maybe I just grew up with video games and I just want to gamify everything. But when I was serving in the military, it just felt like there were all these like level up achievements and points and rewards. That's just how my brain operates. I just kind of, some people hate it, but my brain just operated that way where if I was given a goal, I would say, "Oh, I think I can achieve that goal, and I will work towards that goal." You then get it, and you feel proud of yourself, and then you just move on to the next goal. So with the military, there's all these goalposts where you're trying to make progress. Whether it's being promoted or getting some kind of certification or certificate or achievement. I don't know why, but I really enjoyed that. What did I not like about the military? And you're never really off duty. My job might have been a little bit different because we had something called PRP, Personal Reliability Program. Because I worked with nuclear weapons, I was held to a higher standard than other people in the military. And even when I was not at work or I was on vacation, I still felt like I was doing work because I had to be careful what I said, I had to be careful what I ate. I couldn't even take diet supplements without getting approval from the med group first. I couldn't put anything in my body if I didn't have a previous history of using it because it might have affected me, it might have affected my body or my mind while doing my job being in charge of nuclear weapons. So my experience, just because of my job, I just felt like the scrutiny and the lens was on me all the time, and I never got a break. I lived like that for almost 5 years, and as soon as As soon as I got out, as soon as I was a civilian again, that pressure was gone, and I really don't miss it at all.
I feel you, buddy. I mean, I'm in the army for almost like 8 years, almost 8 years. You have no personal life whatsoever. It's kind of hard.
I'll
Um,
give you I'll give you another example. Like if I had gotten a speeding ticket, while on vacation or something, I have to meet with my squadron commander and explain it. If I was having financial trouble, or if I was having marital problems, or if there was something happening in my personal life, I had to meet with my squadron commander and talk to him about it. I had to uh, just giving you an idea of what my life was like.
yeah. And speaking of army, do you have some kind of crazy story about the army?
You're saying Army, but I was in the Air Force. In the United
Yeah,
States,
yeah,
they're
yeah.
different branches. Crazy story in the Air Force. Oh, I actually did meet some Russians one time.
Oh,
Uh, so there's something we call the New START Treaty. This was negotiated between Russia and the United States, like in 2000 or 2007 or 2008. And part of this treaty is that Americans get to go to Russian military bases to inspect nuclear sites to make sure they're not cheating, by hiding nukes somewhere. And Russians get to come to the United States to inspect American military bases to make sure that we're complying with the treaty. And for both sides, this is an intelligence gathering operation where the people you send, they're taking notes and observing everything. They want to see, are the walls, are the paint on the walls chipping? Do the tires look worn out? It's an intelligence gathering operation. And we had a group of Russians come to Vandenberg Air Force Base, and because these trips are so common, like it wasn't even viewed as a big deal. They send junior enlisted people out there with them to open up the silo they want to look at and just kind of like look around at everything. So they asked me while I was at Vandenberg if I wanted to go out there and join them, go out there and observe them. And I said, heck yeah, I want to see some Russians. So this was back in 2016. So this was a long time ago. So I got to go out to this silo on the beach in Vandenberg, and the Russians came on a bus with their interpreter and their guide, and they were giving a brief to the Russians to explain to them, all the safety procedures they would have to take. They'd have to put on a harness, attach a cable, make sure they were safe and they didn't fall down the silo while looking into it. And they were explaining to them that they needed to take off all their jewelry. So they had these Russians all looked like mafia
yeah, yeah.
guys. They were covered in tattoos. I don't know why. Why would you wear all your jewelry on an international trip? But they had necklaces, they had rings, and the safety person was telling them you have to take off all your jewelry and rings before you can look over the silo to make sure nothing's in there. And the translator said something different. The translator said something to the effect of, you have to take it all off. And the Russians just started howling, laughing because they were like, "Oh yeah," the interpreter was a woman. They were like, "Oh yeah, baby, we'll take off, we'll take everything off." and
Oh,
then she had to say, "No, no, no, your jewelry, your rings and your necklaces." Other than that, she was explaining to them where the designated smoking site was. They were only allowed to smoke at one point on site, and they all perked up and got really excited because they all wanted a cigarette break, and that's all they cared about was just going through the formality and then getting their cigarette and getting back on the bus. But these guys were both very young and very old. It was a group of like 6 or 7 of them, and Two of them looked like they were in their 50s or 60s. These were probably retired colonels. And then the rest of them were much younger looking dudes in very good shape, probably FSB officers.
Yeah, probably. I saw a Russian, like leaving Russian, uh, for the last time in my life when I was a kid. So it was probably like the end of the 90s, and my dad was a military, still a military back then. We were on a bus going somewhere like downtown, and my dad was wearing like his new uniform. They designed like new uniform for the officers of the Ministry of Defense, and we were on a bus. And for some reason, because again, Ukraine and Russia had this quasi friendship for quite some years, we had like mutual programs for Russian soldiers as well. So in this bus, we met a Russian dude, and he was sitting literally against us, in the seat against us, and he said, he looked at my dad at his new uniform, and he said, "It's kind of thin. You will get cold in winter." I was like, what are you gonna answer? My dad smiled and showed at his patch this, the two-headed, genetically modified bird. He said, uh, "It's got two heads. We saw such birds in Chernobyl. They don't live for long." I was like, nailed it. So yeah, it was funny. Uh, I mean, what kind of attitude do they generally have, like to American servicemen?
Well, like these Russians that I met this one time, for them, it's just a formality. They're just it's the treaty obligation, and they're just going through the motions. I'm sure both sides are well aware if one side or the other is cheating on the treaty, but it's a trip to America. I'm sure this is a huge, exciting, thing that they get to do. And they like going to Vandenberg because it's in California. So
Uh-huh.
what I heard is that they want to go to California. It's nice weather. It's beautiful, and they like going to Walmart in order to buy blue jeans and get like American, get maybe alcohol or some kind of snacks, because like they'll bring the blue jeans and the snacks back to Russia to give to their girlfriends or their kids or whatever to impress them. But it's a huge, like, I would have loved, if I had stayed in the military, to be the opposite. I, the New START treaty has been suspended. Nobody is doing inspections of each other's sites. Russia is not on good terms with anyone. But once upon a time, maybe it would have been possible for me to go visit a Russian base. And I've talked to service members that did those inspections of Russian military bases, and the Russian military bases are terrible. Like, they will, your temporary lodging they put you in will not have like heating or air conditioning. It won't have like functioning toilets or running water. The speculation is that they do it deliberately, but maybe they're not doing it deliberately. Maybe that's how everyone at that Russian military base lives. They don't have forced air heating or air conditioning or working plumbing. It's just crazy to think that Russia wouldn't spend the money to modernize these military bases just a little bit.
So probably that's the answer, why they steal Ukrainian toilets and air conditioners. Probably they just want to improve their own bases, which sounds plausible.
2022 is the year of the washing machine, apparently.
Yeah,
Got to get those chips out so you can build some missiles.
yeah, true. It's crazy. Uh, uh, Archie Guy 15 asks, what can you say about the upcoming land lease start?
The United States hasn't done this in 80 years, so your guess is as good as mine. But I'm hoping that over the last 7 months that there have been some very motivated and intelligent people who have been planning this stuff. It's going to sound stupid for me to explain this, but the reason why it starts on October 1st is because that is the new fiscal calendar year for the United States military. So when Congress passes a law in order to allocate money or approve stuff, they just they just wait for the new fiscal year so that all the money can be properly tracked and maintained. So I wish that, yes, more support had been given earlier, but that's the reason why October 1st. But what this
Mhm,
means, what the Lend Lease Act means, is that President Biden and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin can do whatever they want. Anything that they think will help Ukraine militarily achieve its objectives, if it's in the United States stockpile, they can lend or lease it to the Ukrainians. So, what is coming? I don't want to speculate, but I hope it's a lot. I'm sure that it's being sent on ships, and the ships are being loaded. You know, everything probably has already been planned and earmarked. The Department of Defense will make announcements, you know, broadly what is being included, but there might be some surprises. They don't have to tell the Russians what's coming.
mhm. I'm reading commentaries here. Uh, People are interested. What kind of what kind of destruction can we expect from a nuclear explosion in Kiev? Of course, it depends on the type of the weapon, type of the system. Uh,
So the question, what would a nuclear weapon do to Kiev?
yeah,
It would destroy it. Let's not entertain that as a possibility. I know that more surface to air missile systems are being delivered and being set up to protect Ukrainian airspace. Uh, I don't think the Russians would do that because that doesn't help them achieve any of their objectives. I think if they were to use a nuclear weapon, it would be against Ukrainian forces or Ukrainian positions closer to the front line. And they would use a smaller yield device, not designed to destroy an entire city.
yeah.
I think let's actually talk about nukes and why I don't think Russia has used them and why I don't think Russia will use them. And the answer is the other nuclear powers, specifically India, China, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. Let's talk about the other nuclear states aside from France, UK, and USA. Once you use nuclear weapons in an offensive war to take territory, you just change the rules of the game for everyone. So is it okay now for Israel to take territory and use nuclear weapons to back up their claims? Can the North Koreans do it? Can the Indians and Pakistanis do it? The deal that we've all had the last 80 years is you can use them in self-defense. The United States military is the only one that has used nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But the United States right now is not occupying Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The United States and their allies worked to rebuild Japan. And let's go ahead and say 80 years, it worked. Japan is the world's third largest economy. They're an independent and sovereign state. They're doing just fine. But to nuke a country and then say this is now our territory forever, we want to take this and we're going to use nukes to take this. That's a red line that I don't think the other nuclear powers would tolerate. India, China, Pakistan. Even North Korea doesn't want anything to do with this conflict or this war. They put out this statement 2 days ago saying that they've never sold ammunition to the Russians and they're not sending troops to the Russians. They're not helping Russia in any way. So I think for Vladimir Putin to use a nuclear weapon, the other nuclear powers would then sanction him, isolate him, say we're not even going to do business with you. You crossed a red line even for us.
I wonder why didn't they do that earlier?
Why Russia hasn't used a nuclear weapon
No,
earlier?
no, no, no. I mean, why didn't they implement, like maximum sanctions that?
Why hasn't India or China participated in the sanctions?
No, I mean,
Is that your
not India. I mean the West. Like, why didn't? No, you actually answered that question already. Uh, let's move on to another one. We have an interesting question here, and by the way, this one is very important for Ukrainian audience as well. Uh, will the midterm election in US change the support to Ukraine?
I don't think so. I think right now, Joe Biden is a Democrat. The Senate and Congress, House Representatives are represent the majority party is the Democrat. But support for Ukraine is bipartisan between both parties. I think like 70% of Democrats are in favor of more support for Ukraine, and like 55% of Republicans are in favor of more support for Ukraine. So even if the party, even if the Republican Party took control of the House of Representatives or the Senate, I don't think it's going to change anything. I think this there's very few issues that the two parties in America agree on, and supporting Ukraine is one of them. So even with elections in America, Joe Biden is not up for election, so the White House and Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin will not be changing. Those are the only two people that matter for the Lend Lease Act, really. So yeah, Putin's plan to just freeze the conflict until democratic countries have elections, it's not going to change anything.
It's nice to know. And we also have a question from Miriam Ward, because not all of our viewers are familiar with the topic. She asked, "What's the difference between a tactical nuclear weapon and a strategic weapon?" I think that you are the best person to answer this question.
Oh, I don't want to get the textbook definition wrong here, but I would believe that a tactical nuke is one that you would use on the battlefield against your enemy, and a strategic nuke would be. Um, I don't know exactly. I mean, I would imagine a strategic nuke would be we're gonna bomb this entire city. It depends on the yield, depends on how destructive the capability, but Uh, tactical nukes, small scale impacts. Strategic nukes, big impacts. That's how I would understand it or define it.
Exactly. It's tactical nuke is like small boom.
So Ryan Macbeth made a video about tactical nukes and where Russia would be most likely to use it, and they would be most likely to use it at one of Ukraine's like bridgeheads to get across the Oskil River. There's only a couple points where the Ukrainians are successfully getting across that river. So to use a tactical nuke on that area to just basically irradiate it and wipe out any forces that are there, that would be a use of a tactical nuke. Yeah.
You think they would not use tactical nuke on major cities?
It doesn't help them achieve their objectives. I mean, they could do it just to be evil and vindictive, but if they're actually serious about winning the war, nuking Kiev doesn't help them win the war. Don't you think the fighting would continue even if Kiev was nuked?
I know that the fighting would continue if even if Kiev was captured.
I think we're
So
past the point of this delusional belief that Russia has that if they're just evil enough, Ukraine will submit to slavery. Because that's what I view it as. You know, Ukraine has been more or less an independent country from Russia for 30 years. But if they resubmit now, it'll be another 100 years before Ukraine has a chance at independence again. So Russia thought that they could torture and scare and torment people and terrorize them into submitting back under Kremlin rule, but I don't think that's going to work.
absolutely, what they try to convince people with is that they try to convince people that Ukrainians are losing dramatically more men than Russians, and it's like, whenever we have the bot attack or something like that. By the way, I made an announcement about our today's podcast, and it's literally flooded with Russian trolls, which is great. I think it's a like a seal of quality. So Russian trolls like to, say things like, "I saw I saw video where 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers were dead. There are so many dead Ukrainian soldiers. Oh my god!" And they try, share such messages uh, like anywhere, everywhere. And what they don't understand is that even if Ukrainians were dying in much bigger numbers than Russians, there's a small difference. We're dying because we are dying for freedom, and Russian soldiers are dying for nothing.
Yeah, like you're explaining what's the Ukrainian alternative? You know, to
Yeah,
give, let's say you want to give Russia what they want, and you're willing at this point to end the war and become part of Russia. How are your people going to be treated when you see cities like Bucha or Izium, or how your prisoners of war are being treated in captivity? That's not really an attractive option that the Russians are giving Ukrainians. You know,
absolutely.
if Russia uh, if Russia was more competent and you know, conducted this war differently, where they didn't target civilians and it was just fighting between the Russian military and the Ukrainian military, and they weren't brutal, they weren't savage, they weren't evil, maybe there would be a higher percentage of Ukrainians saying this war isn't worth it. Look, all of our soldiers are dying. We're going to put pressure on Zelensky or our civilian government to give in to Russian demands. But because Russia has been terrorizing and torturing and killing innocent civilians, I don't see the Ukrainian military has an option. There is no surrender. The conditions would be worse. More people would die if you surrendered.
Absolutely. We were occupied by Russian uh, Russian created Soviet Union for 70 years, and we know what it is. That's why we don't want to return into this, this statewide prison. Uh, do you know anything about gray drones?
No, I don't. I can't say I know anything about gray drones.
There's a
When you
question
say
from
gray, you just mean like the color? You know, the Predator and the Reaper drones are gray.
the gray with capital G. It's a question from Mick Ranger. Is the Ukrainian army capable of operating the gray drone system? And do you think the US will send the gray drones? I
I did,
don't.
I did, I did see something about that on Twitter just this morning, that members of our Congress were telling the Department of Defense, you need to send the Ukrainians this drone system now. I think there's a lot of people in the United States government really upset with Iran. One, they hated Iran before this war, but the fact that Iran is willing to give military weapons and drones to the Russians, I like that actually motivates some Americans more than Russia fighting Ukraine. The fact that Iran is helping Russia, okay, well now we got to give Ukraine better drone technology to deter other countries from having a similar idea of helping Russia. Like, I don't think the United States can sanction Iran much more. We've had bad relations with them since they took our embassy workers hostage 50 years ago, almost 50 years ago. But yeah, I saw a tweet about that, and yeah, I think whatever this gray drone technology is, I'm not familiar with it. I think they are sending it to Ukrainians, and I'm sure Ukrainians will figure out how to operate it.
Absolutely. I think I gotta learn more about it. And question from Timothy Wolf: if the nuclear power plant in Ukraine is hit by Russia, will NATO get involved? It's an
De-
interesting one.
Depends on how bad the exposure or the fallout is. You know, if it's a Chernobyl level disaster and there's radiation spewing all over the European continent, yes, I think NATO would get involved. But if it's a small leak that can be quickly contained, maybe NATO wouldn't get involved then. NATO would have to say, NATO countries are being threatened by this. Russia, you caused it. We're now getting involved.
Well, I hope it will not happen. On the other hand, when I was in Chernobyl, I talked to an employee that worked in Chernobyl power plant, and he said he told me a lot of interesting things. For example, he told me that this Chernobyl power plant, like on why it was captured on the first place, because it was used by Russian general as his headquarters, which was smart because even despite the fact that this is a highly radioactive place, but he was conscious that Ukraine would never bomb or shell a Chernobyl power plant. Uh, but as for the Zaporizhian power plant, it's a completely different picture. They use it basically to blackmail Ukrainians and blackmail other countries. It's like we have it in our arms and we can basically do anything we want.
It's yeah, I mean it's abhorrence, it's horrible. I think the future of nuclear power and nuclear energy, countries are going to have to consider this, that in hostilities between nations, people are going to try and seize the nuclear power plants first to hold them hostage because it's like this safe no bomb zone. What Russia has done, I don't know. I don't know if strategic planners ever saw this coming, that a nation would seize a nuclear power plant and then use it as a military base for protection. Like that is just so insane. Has that idea in a science fiction novel ever been written? It's so crazy, and yet Russia is doing it. I think, yeah, it's given the world a lot to think about, and for future wars, future conflicts, I don't know. I don't know how you secure these and you prevent foreign adversaries from seizing them and then using them against you. Yeah, it's pretty terrible.
It's crazy. And there was a problem with guys who were defending the Chernobyl power plant from Russians. They
Well, they
were
dug trenches in the Red Forest, which is has irradiated topsoil, and they were sleeping in the trenches. It took a couple of weeks, but yeah, they were all getting sick from radiation poisoning.
yeah, there were Buryats. That employee had told me that there were Buryat soldiers with radioactive burns on their skin, and
They're pretty dumb.
not only they dug trenches, but they used that soil from trenches to make sandbags.
Oh
and
no, you're right.
yeah, and equip everything, their checkpoints, their
Oh my
positions.
gosh. That's so
Ah,
stupid. They were filling sandbags with irradiated topsoil. Wow.
imagine that.
Well, it's just ignorance. Nobody told them, and they don't learn about it in Russian history. Even if you're a dumb 19-year-old, Russian conscript, you would only do that if you didn't know, right? No one ever explained to you what Chernobyl was or why it's important.
Yeah. Uh, the Gray Eagle military drone is similar to the US Predator drone, quite a sophisticated system. I think that we could probably use them. The question
Yeah,
would
that
be,
that makes sense. Yeah, the Gray Eagle. Yep.
yeah, the question would be probably like spare parts and ammunition.
We'll find a way.
Yeah. Uh, okay, what else we have here? Why Putin being such so crazy guy?
So I think with Putin, he's just the victim of his own success. When Putin took office in the year 2000, I think he was unsure what kind of leader he would be, being a former Soviet KGB officer, part of this democratic capitalist transition in the 90s. He was taking over for Yeltsin, and he was basically handpicked to succeed him. I think there was this couple year period where Putin thought, maybe I'm on Team Europe. Maybe someday Russia will be part of the EU or be part of NATO. He was seeing all of these changes and thinking maybe I'm the transformational, inspirational leader to bring Russia into this new capitalist democracy style government. And I hate to say this as an American, but in 2003, George Bush invaded Iraq. And George Bush and we call them the neocons. They made up all this stuff about weapons of mass destruction, and I think that invasion really impacted Putin. And Putin said, "Wait, no, we're not living in this new liberal utopia of cooperation. It actually is about power and realpolitik, and the sole hegemon, the sole superpower, the United States, can just invade any country they want." I think we're still living with the fallout of that horrible war, that disastrous decision by George Bush and Dick Cheney. Because when Bush invaded Iraq, then North Korea said we need nukes. North Korea said the only way that we can protect ourselves is if we have protect ourselves from America is to have nuclear weapons. And I think it's in 2003 that Putin said, "Nope, we're going back to the old system. I need to solidify my power base and prepare myself because someday the United States could come for me, or that." So yeah, I think Putin stayed in power for 22 years. He eliminated all of his adversaries. He eliminated anybody younger than him that could threaten him to replace him someday. He consolidated the media, he consolidated the military, and he, by many estimates, is the richest man in the world. If he's worth over $200 billion, then that means he's been stealing about $1 billion of wealth from the Russian treasury every single month for 20 years.
Not
And
bad.
yeah, and when you get to that point where you're basically a god amongst your people, because his support was genuine, his propaganda was so effective that he said, "What I have isn't good enough." Being the richest man in the world, 6,000 nuclear weapons, everyone does anything I say. He just said to himself, "I think I can get more. I think I can rebuild the Russian Empire and get back the Baltics, get back Ukraine, get back the Caucasus, get back Central Asia." And yeah, he just decided to go for it. When you're that successful as a world leader, you just think to yourself, what else can I do? You just become delusional with power.
Mm,
Just my
get
just my theory.
get back Alaska.
Get back Alaska. That was a huge mistake selling it to us back in I don't know, when was that? Like 1880? Yeah,
Yeah,
Russia sold Alaska to us, but
something like that. Um,
Alaska's nice.
it's it's awesome. A lot of gold. Um, I wanted to ask you something about. Before that, I wanted to tell you something about Putin. So today I saw an interview with General Malomouj. He is a Ukrainian general who was a chief for our external intelligence for quite a while, and he was asked basically, why does Russia fail so bad in terms of this invasion? Uh, Meaning that Putin was a member of special service, right? Like he was a KGB guy. Like why it happens? And what Malamouj answered was that it depends on the person in the first place, because Uh, in the United States, probably like three presidents were uh, they worked in the special services like previously, uh, like Edgar Hoover,
Are you talking about intelligence or military services?
like intelligence. Yes.
So George Herbert Walker Bush was the former CIA director, and he's also a
Hmm.
World War II veteran. He died a couple years ago, but he was president for 4 years in the early 90s. Um, most U.S. presidents up until Bill Clinton were veterans of some kind, yes, but Bill Clinton never served, Obama never served, Bush only served sort of in the National Guard to avoid being sent to Vietnam. Trump never served, and I don't think Joe Biden is a veteran. I don't think so. No.
So this general, our general, said that probably like three American presidents served in intelligence, and the US is a superpower. In case of Putin, there's a different story because Putin was a guy. So there's this term in Russian, it sounds like смотрящий. It's when there's a criminal world, there's a lot of finances moving and circling in this criminal world, and there's a specific person who is nominated by the criminal circles to supervise everything. And Putin was such a supervisor because he was a KGB guy, and in 80s Russian KGB had a lot of its agents in those criminal rings. So it was basically his responsibility. So he had a lot of money even back then, and yeah, that's what he did. In in the beginning of 2000s, basically, he said he promised his citizens that they will never return to the 90s, because 90s were very very tough for Russia, for Ukraine as well, probably for all the post-Soviet space. And he promised to his citizens, to his electorate, that they will never experience this humiliation, this poverty, like in the 90s. And that was the promise that helped him to, to receive so much support. Because again, in Russia there were a lot of uh, those, old school politicians, uh, descendants of this communist party that tried to take power and promise people stuff, from the Soviet Union. People didn't want to return. People didn't want the return of Soviet Union for obvious reasons. Yeah, but the fact is that Putin was closely connected to criminal rings already, like in the 80s. So it's like not a lot of people know this side of him. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think Putin operates like a mafia boss, ordering hits on his political opponents and stealing money and doing the laundry. That's what the mafia does.
Laundry,
And
yeah.
I think I think the way that he's always interacted with other world leaders, uh, he wants to give off this vibe. He wants to give off this. We call them spooks, intelligence guys. They claim that they know you better than you know yourself. So I think Putin has always prided himself on the intelligence agencies and getting that security cam footage or that microphone or that audio. I mean, Russia, at least in the major cities, it's all a surveillance state. Everything is being recorded. Everything is being saved. They want they want people to live in fear of the intelligence that they gather on them and what they know about them. And that's just the way that Putin likes to live. I mean, I'm sure that kind of stuff makes him happy.
Yeah. There's a small small commentary from Machiavelli. Mr. Machiavelli, big honor to see you here. Gorby was the president. What do you think about Gorby?
Gorbachev,
Yeah,
the last Soviet premier.
yeah.
I think so. Um, So with Gorbachev, he was supposed to be a reformer. He was supposed to be this young guy with new energy. When he took over, I think he was in his early 50s, and he was supposed to be the next generation of leaders of the Soviet Union. I can't even name them all, but in the late 70s, early 80s, the Soviet Union had like three or four different premiers because they just kept dying. They were all of the World War
For
II
some reason, yeah.
generation. So they kept dying, and so they finally picked somebody young enough with energy and vibrance. And Gorbachev was a communist. He was a true Marxist who believed that the Soviet Union was this good guiding force, and that if they just cleaned up or fixed certain things, that everything would work. So while Gorbachev was the premier, he did make some reforms and fought to maintain the Soviet Union. He sent in the tanks to the Baltics when they had an uprising, and I'm sure while he was in charge of the Soviet Union, he knew about and greenlit lots of horrible things, the evil things that the Soviet Union did to its own people and did to its neighbors. And I think at the highest levels, you find ways to justify it. You say, "This is the necessary evil to keep the peace. This is the necessary evil to benefit my people." And ultimately, his reforms, I forget what they call it, like perestroika and what was the other term? But
Glasnost.
yeah, that's it. And they gave too much authority. They gave too much power to the individual republic states, and then you know the Warsaw Pact started falling apart with the strikes in Poland, and then Russia couldn't, or Moscow, the Kremlin couldn't maintain it. And I think the person who single-handedly brought down the Soviet Union and Gorbachev was Yeltsin. It was Boris Yeltsin who saw the Soviet Union collapsing, their loss, as his gain. He knew that if Gorbachev could be taken down, he'd be the number one guy in Moscow. The Kremlin would be his. So I think Boris Yeltsin did some pretty shady stuff in order to undermine the Communist Party and the Soviet system. And I mean, once you lost Russia, once you lost Boris Yeltsin, the other 14 Soviet republics weren't going to fight to keep it together. So I think Gorbachev knew what was happening, and in the last year or so, he just kind of went on vacation and just kind of closed his eyes and just let it happen. I think we view Gorbachev from history as a hero for letting it happen. I read in the book Command and Control by Eric Schlosser that the KGB took him into custody. The KGB said, "The system's falling apart. What are you doing?" And Gorbachev was expected to be purged. He was expected to have him and his entire family killed by the KGB to keep the Soviet system going. But in the end, he made it out alive, and he only died like 2 weeks ago. The guy lived another 30 years.
Yeah, and he enjoyed life. I can tell you that in Ukraine we don't really like him. The reason being is that he supported the annexation of Crimea publicly, and you know, it means that all Ukrainian babushkas will curse him forever for that. And we are reaching the end of the stream, and before the end of the stream, I would like to ask you if you plan to have some new awesome videos with supporters of Ukraine, and who are they, if you do?
So I am trying to do one podcast guest a week. And next week, I have the Russian dude on. His name is Artem. He lives in Canada. But there are other YouTubers that talk about the Ukraine conflict that I want to get on. uh, Artur, the soldier from, I don't want to say the wrong one, but he's from one of the Baltic states. He has the catchphrase "knock him out cold." I also want to get Anders Puck Nielsen. I think he's German. He's made some pretty interesting videos. There's another Russian living in the UK named Vlad Vexler. He makes some pretty interesting videos. There's also Roman from NFKZRD or something like that. He he's a Russian draft dodger now, but he's living in Georgia to escape the war. So yeah, every week I want to try and find one of these guys and or girls and get their perspective on what's happening.
Awesome. Looking forward to see those videos, of course. And guys, don't forget to subscribe to Jake's channel. Totally worth it. And yeah, I think it's probably a good time to say goodbye to our viewers. Probably want to say something to our Ukrainian viewers and our followers from all around the world.
To any Ukrainians watching this stream, you have my admiration. I have been blown away the last 7 months by your courage and your dedication to maintaining your independence from Russia. I only wish there was more that the rest of the world could be doing at the moment to support you guys, but you have my respect and my admiration, and I'll continue making videos about this conflict until Russia is defeated. For everyone else in the world, just by following Operator Starsky, you're keeping yourself informed. You're tuning into the conflict. It's easy if you're not part of one of the states experiencing hostilities to tune it out and just watch sports or music videos or something. But it is very important. I think this conflict deeply impacts the entire world, and hopefully we can get this resolved in the next couple months. Check me out on my channel. I'll be uploading a new video in the next hour or two.
Sounds great. We'll definitely do that. And thank you so much for these words, because, having such friends as you, for us, it's not only an honor, but also it means that with people like you supporting us in Ukraine, it means that we literally cannot lose, because friends are important, and friends is something that makes us stronger always. Thank you so much for being here with us. It was a big pleasure. Again, it's always a pleasure to see you, and I hope that our friends in the chat also appreciate it. And thank you so much, everybody who was watching our stream. Uh,
Have
you
a
are
good
the
evening.
best. Yeah, have a good evening, and we'll see you in the next one. My name is Operator Starsky, and my good friend Jake. Bye bye.